And former Rhodesia, while compiling a documentary on that country, I was told by officers that the South African Defence Force in particular was starving Rhodesia of ammunition and weaponry. In fact, a former cabinet minister of Rhodesia, Mr. Jack Musset, he said that South Africa had been strangling Rhodesia.
I tried to maintain good official relations with Rhodesia. And Ian Smith makes mention of it in his book, The Great Betrayal, in which he pointed out how Rhodesia was betrayed by other forces. But I maintained, to a certain extent, good relations with them. I even paid an official visit to Rhodesia. And Smith, on occasion, came down here. But to say that we starved them, I think it's a bit of an exaggeration.
But did we stop supplying them with weaponry and other supplies, for instance?
You must remember at that stage we were under pressure too, and heavy pressure.
On the issue of separate development or apartheid, after the assassination of Dr. Verwoerd in 1966, even the Sunday Times editorialized that the concept of the Bantu homelands was one of the great legacies Dr. Verwoerd has left his country. Did you ever really believe that the country's black people and the international community would accept the idea of black homelands spread around South Africa?
Provided we tried to convince them that they must accept it and cooperate with us in the fields of agriculture and industrial development within those homelands. So I really believed that we could gradually continue making it possible for them to economically advance forward.
Why did it not eventually transpire then?
It was a question that we tried to follow the policy of winning the hearts and minds of people. But on the other hand, the pressure and the total onslaught made it very difficult for them. You must remember, at that stage, terrorism took place in South Africa with the bombs in Pretoria, and terrorists entered across our borders, and they killed people. They even burned tires in Johannesburg streets to block the traffic. And we had to counter that with strong measures.
Further to the violence issue, we quote now from the so-called Mandela document, which was presented to P.W. Botha before their meeting in July 1989.
The organization, the ANC, has no vested interest in violence, but we consider the armed struggle a legitimate form of self-defense against a morally repugnant system of government which will not allow even peaceful forms of protest.
Mr. Botha, a hypothetical question, but it has to be asked. What do you think South Africa would have looked like today had there been black majority rule in the country since 1948 when the National Party came into power, or even since the 1960s when much of Africa was decolonized?
I think by this time we would have been in the drain already.
Why do you say that?
Because the forces of evil gradually took over in Africa, took over in Mozambique, took over in Angola, took over in Rhodesia, and the pressure against South Africa on the East Front and the West Front. That pressure was continually growing. And the result was the propaganda among the black people, trying to convince them that everything was rosy in the garden for them if they just supported the idea of one man, one vote. That was a miserable situation that we found ourselves in.
Miserable indeed. Mr. Mandela wrote that the National Party and its Western friends regarded majority rule as a disaster to be avoided at all costs. And he then commented,
Yet majority rule and internal peace are like the two sides of a single coin. And white South Africa simply has to accept that there will never be peace and stability in this country until the principle is fully applied.
Many would say that during those years, black people were regarded as inferior to whites. I mean, even the expression subhuman is used. Do you think whites ever regarded black people in that light?
To a certain extent, it's true that that propaganda was made. And from certain parts of our media, that was a part of the propaganda. From outside, it was part of the propaganda. From the United Nations anti-South African actions, that was the idea behind driving them. But I never looked at the people in this sense of inferior, because many black people, I repeat, many black people and coloreds cooperated positively with government policies.
But if we didn't regard them as inferior, I'm saying we as whites,
we wouldn't have taken into the industrial development areas if they were inferior.
But we denied them so many things. I mean, they couldn't eat in the same restaurants, we had job reservation, they couldn't vote or anything. I mean, is that not the way you treat a person that's inferior?
You must remember one thing. We did not originate that sense or that part of the so-called apartheid policy. This very policy started in Lord Milner's time, in Cecil Rhodes' time, and in the time of the British governors of the Eastern Province and Natal. So it's a very, very old policy that existed. We didn't invite it.
No, but we were happy to perpetuate it because, I mean, we were actually racists at heart at that stage as well, isn't it?
Yes,
so?
Some of our people were, and some of them are still.
Moving on now, actually, and tying in with this, that famous Rubicon speech of yours in 1985. Speculation was rife at the time that you would announce major changes and even a commitment to the concept of a unitary state.
That's right. Yeah. But that was not true. And the Rubicon, the word Rubicon, was only one word in the whole speech. But suddenly it became the Rubicon speech. That wasn't the case.